Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has recently passed a 1,000-day threshold. His army is advancing at a faster rate than at any time since the early months of the war. But this is still happening only in Donbas. In the US, Donald Trump was elected as president, while the current president, Joe Biden, has finally authorized Ukraine to launch Western long-range missiles on Russian soil in response to North Korean involvement. We are entering another, more unpredictable stage of the war in Ukraine. Check out this video on the events of November 2024 to find out what this means. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us. We couldn't be doing it without your help. Russia continues steadily advancing in Donbas. A particularly threatening situation is emerging in the southern sector of Donbas. The Russian army is attempting several relatively large envelopments here. Since the capture of Vuhledar, they have come closer to Kurakova from the south, reaching Trudova and capturing Ilyinka, Dalnyr, Romanivka, and several other villages. There is more pressure coming from the north as well, after the occupation of Novodimitrivka, Novoselidivka, and Voznesenka. These flanking attacks are accompanied by the frontal assault on Kurakova proper, as the Russians have already captured the eastern part of this town. Assaults from several directions stretch Ukrainian defenders, and if the Russians manage to develop their success north of Yasna Polyana and Sontsivka, they will gain fire control of the sole supply line, the N15 highway, which the Ukrainians are currently holding. The loss of this highway would mean the encirclement of the Ukrainian army units in the Kurakova sector, which means they will be forced to leave Kurakova. A similar linked envelopment attempt is progressing in the Velika Novosilka sector, one of the primary axes of the Ukrainian counter-offensive in 2023. Again, after the capture of Vuhledar, the Russians have achieved meaningful progress towards the west and northwest. In early November, the Russian army completed the capture of Shektarske, and by the end of the month, they had achieved a localized breakthrough, reaching Velika Novosilka. On the western flank of this axis, they entered Novodarivka and Rivnepil, while also putting significant pressure on Makarivka. Potentially an even bigger envelopment may be on the books for the Russian army. They are trying to advance northwards from Rozdolna, while the Russian units in the Pokrovsk sector have made a wedge in the Ukrainian defenses along the Solona River in Zhovde. At this point, it looks far-fetched, and the Russians have not proven capable of conducting large-scale operations of proportions like this so far in this war, but some directions of Russian attacks in this sector may hint at this intention. Another threatening advance is going on in the Kupiansk sector. In early November, the Russian army captured Krylyakivka. With this, the Russians have reached the eastern bank of the Oskil River and have cut the Ukrainian bridgehead here in two. Meanwhile, a small Russian force broke through Ukrainian defenses in Holubivka and entered Kupiansk on November 14th. Several vehicles dropped off a group of Russian infantrymen, who managed to gain a foothold, initially taking the Ukrainians by surprise. The 11th Ukrainian Brigade has since managed to expel the Russian unit from Kupiansk, but this assault creates questions about the defense of this strategically important town. Losing Kupiansk would mean the defeat of the Ukrainian bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Oskil, which was liberated in the autumn of 2022. On November 25th, the Russians managed to create their own bridgehead on the western bank by crossing the Oskil on boats south of Novomilinsk. The Ukrainians were apparently caught by surprise in this unexpected attack. As of November 27th, it is reported that the Russians are still there, which means that this was not just a raid, but an attempt at a permanent bridgehead. Russia does not stop its attempts to regain control of the Ukrainian-captured portion of the Kursk Oblast either. And now they're being aided by North Korean soldiers, estimated to have a strength of a couple of thousand to 12,000 at this point in Kursk. The 810th Brigade has made several costly assaults on the western flank of the Kursk salient. Again, they lost many pieces of equipment in these attacks, but recovered some ground around Kremenoa and Daryino. But as we said numerous times, Putin is comfortable with this situation. Major losses are not a major concern for the Kremlin as long as they make territorial gains. This is particularly true for Kursk, as it is crucial for political purposes to expel the Ukrainian army from Russian territory as soon as possible. According to the Ukrainian media's claim, based on their sources in the army command, At its highest, the AFU controlled 1,300 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast. At this point, this area has diminished to 800 square kilometers. We have talked in depth about the causes of Ukrainian troubles on the battlefield in recent months. The chief of them is lack of manpower. Back in May, Ukraine adopted a law expanding the pool of available conscripts, but it has not really changed the situation much. In an interview, Zelensky acknowledged that so far, the mobilization has not solved the manpower issue. A Ukrainian commander has told The Economist that the mobilization drive is barely achieving 2/3 of the intended recruitment. Ukrainian media and soldiers have been critical of the way newly mobilized and unprepared soldiers are being deployed on the battlefield. It is reported that the Ukrainian command has chosen to create brand new brigades consisting of newly mobilized soldiers, instead of sending them to replenish already standing brigades. The critique is that this makes new brigades unprepared for the hardships of war and more likely to retreat when coming under heavy pressure. In any case, so far the mobilization in Ukraine has not changed the fortunes of war in its favor. Not everything is rosy on the Russian side either. So far, Putin has managed to avoid the second round of mobilization, instead maintaining the rate of 30,000 new contract recruits per month. Apparently, so far this has been sufficient to cover for massive Russian losses. In November, the Pentagon estimated that the recruitment rate may have dropped to 25,000 per month. We do not know if this is true, and the arrival of North Koreans and possibly even Yemeni mercenaries, according to the Financial Times, will possibly ensure that the alleged drop in recruitment of Russians does not have a meaningful impact on the battlefield, at least not in the immediate future. However, the struggles of the Russian economy are very real, since the chief of the central bank, Nabiullina herself, admitted this to the Russian Duma. She stated that the Russian economy has reached the limit of its manufacturing capacity, and there is a shortage of workers, all while the state continues to stimulate demand. According to Nabiullina, this creates a risk of stagflation. Meanwhile, the Russian government modified its compensation policy for wounded Russian soldiers. Previously, all Russian servicemen wounded in Ukraine were guaranteed to get a one-time payment of 3 million rubles, but this new policy has decreased the one-time payment to 100,000 rubles and 1 million rubles to the lightly wounded. Now only severely wounded soldiers would get a high compensation of 4 million rubles. This also might be a sign of the Russian government's intention to cut expenses wherever possible. However, Russia's economic problems should not be exaggerated. It has proven more resilient to Western sanctions and isolation than expected. Putin believes that Russia can outlast Ukraine in this war of attrition thanks to superior military and economic resources, hoping that the Ukraine fatigue in the West will soon lead to the collapse of stable military aid to Kyiv. Will it collapse? Many have argued that Trump would stop military aid to Ukraine if he is elected and force Kyiv into an unfavorable deal with Russia. His vice president nominee, Vance, key backers Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard, and Trump's many other allies, are known skeptics of supporting Ukraine. Now that he has been elected, what can we expect? Trump has already talked with both Zelensky and Putin. According to the Washington Post, Trump asked Putin not to escalate, told him that Ukraine could be persuaded to give up Crimea, and expressed hope for further talks to resolve the war. The Wall Street Journal claims that the Trump team is currently discussing several plans to end the war. One of these plans envisages freezing the war. It suggests creating a demilitarized zone along the front line, which will host peacekeepers. The nationality of the peacekeepers is not determined, but the deployment of American troops is excluded as an option. Ukraine delays its NATO accession for at least 20 years in exchange for the continuation of American military support. Curiously, a similar peace idea has been proposed by Turkey's President Erdogan, according to Bloomberg, and by the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, James Stavridis. The Polish Prime Minister Tusk said, in the near future, a statement on the date of the ceasefire, on which border it will operate, and security guarantees for Ukraine is expected. This plan is at the stage of preparation. Also, the German Chancellor Scholz talked with Putin on November 15th for the first time since the start of the war. A lot of diplomatic work is clearly happening behind the scenes, but given the drastic differences in expectations of the warring sides, the success of these attempts is far from being a foregone conclusion. Putin's spokesman Peskov and intelligence chief Naryshkin have already stated that freezing the conflict is unacceptable for Russia. According to Reuters, Putin insists on recognition of Russia's sovereignty over Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts, including the portions under Ukraine's control, as a precondition of negotiations. Ukraine is also not keen on freezing the war. Freezing the current front lines means that Ukraine will remain in a limbo state. with the threat of a Russian invasion always looming over them. This in turn may prompt further migration from Ukraine and will make the country unattractive for foreign investment. It will be interesting to see how Trump navigates through this tough diplomatic impasse. After all, he has promised to end the war in Ukraine immediately after he assumes office. Trump may threaten Putin with increased aid to Ukraine if he refuses to negotiate reasonably, or he may threaten Zelensky by cutting all aid to Kyiv if he refuses to give in to Putin's demands. Both are possible. An unnamed aide of Zelensky has told the Ukrainian media that Ukraine's plan for now is to defend hard, protect their gains in Kursk, and wait for January. He claimed that after winning the election, Trump has gained access to classified information about the war in Ukraine, which has changed his outlook on the situation. We shall see if that is true. For now, sources report about one last card up if cut their military aid. The Times says that a briefing paper from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense strategizes about the development of a nuclear weapon. Ukraine has the personnel, experience, and resources to complete this task within months, according to Ukrainian sources. At this point, this is a bit far-fetched, but if Kyiv indeed decides to develop nuclear weapons, this would create a whole new situation. A nuclear power fighting another nuclear power directly in a full-scale war for the first time in history. For now, only one side is threatening the world with a nuclear war. After months of stalling, the Biden administration has finally authorized the use of ATACMS long-range missiles to strike Russian soil. This was followed by an authorization to do the same with Storm Shadow missiles. The geographical boundaries of these strikes, set by Ukraine's allies, is unknown, but it is assumed that at this point, Kyiv is authorized to launch long-range strikes on the Russian military assets in the regions bordering Ukraine, such as Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod oblasts. The United States has probably taken this long-awaited step as a reaction against the escalation caused by the direct North Korean involvement in the war. Putin reacted predictably to this news. He ordered an update to Russia's nuclear doctrine, which now says that if a non-nuclear country attacks Russia with the support of a nuclear country, Russia retains the right to make a nuclear strike. As of November 27th, Ukraine has made 4 successful long-range strikes on Russian soil. ATACMS missiles have destroyed a weapon depot in the Bryansk Oblast, an S-400 air defense system in the Kursk Oblast, along with damaging the Kalino airfield. 12 Storm Shadow missiles were launched on November 21st to destroy the underground command post in Marino, Kursk Oblast. And according to the Global Defense Corps, this strike killed 500 North Korean soldiers and a Russian general, along with injuring and killing dozens of officers and soldiers. Russia retaliated by firing an intermediate-range ballistic missile on November 21st, which Putin claimed to be a newly developed Orishnik missile on Dnipro. Some analysts have claimed that it was a new modification of the RS-26 IRBM. This IRBM is capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Each missile carries 6 warheads, with 6 sub-munitions in every warhead. Without a doubt, this was Putin's way of showing that he's not bluffing when he's making nuclear threats, in order to dissuade the West from crossing red lines imposed by him. It was not Russia's only notable long-range strike this month, as on November 17th, they made one of their biggest attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, launching 120 missiles and 90 drones on Kyiv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Volyn, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kryvyi Rih, among other Ukrainian cities and regions. According to Zelensky, some of the Russian drones and missiles were shot down by F-16s. Ukraine is in need of whatever air defense systems and weapons it can get, and the United States has pledged to send 500 Patriot and NASAMS interceptors by the end of the year for this purpose. They have also pledged more than 200 Stryker armored personnel carriers, artillery shells, HIMARS ammunition, Stinger manpads, and Javelin anti-tank guns, among other military equipment. Another important development is the pledge to deliver anti-personnel landmines with controlled detonations, which may have an important impact on defensive operations against advancing Russians. Lastly, Pentagon official Sabrina Singh stated that President Biden wants to send $7.1 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine before Trump's inauguration. France has completed the training of Ukraine's new 155th Anna of Kyiv Brigade, consisting of 4,500 soldiers, which will be equipped with 128 VAB armored personnel carriers, 18 AMX light tanks, 18 Caesar artillery systems, and other French weapons. Germany has announced the delivery of 47 MRAP vehicles, 40,000 artillery shells, 4 Gepard vehicles, Marder vehicles, and other equipment. There are also rumblings about Germany's intention to send 4,000 drones, known as Mini Taurus. There have been other important promises by Kyiv's Western allies, including an additional 13 F-16 fighter jets to be delivered by Denmark and 1 million shells from the EU. Recently, Zelensky expressed his satisfaction with the timely delivery of the pledged military aid, which is a marked change from his earlier complaints about delayed deliveries. So, Russia still enjoys a firepower advantage and will probably continue to do so. But one can argue that with the faster delivery of Western military aid, Ukraine's main challenge is manpower issues more so than a lack of weapons. The increased domestic production is also helping. According to Zelensky, in 2024, Ukraine produced 2.5 million mortar and artillery shells. There have been complaints from Ukrainian soldiers about the quality of these shells. But if Zelensky's statistics are correct, it is a very impressive number. Ukraine and Russia may be edging closer to the end of the war under pressure from different sides, particularly as the war is going towards a more unpredictable route, with the involvement of North Korea, the American permission to use its missiles on Russian soil, and other developments. There is definitely some momentum building up for negotiations, but at the same time, both sides are working hard to be ready for a longer war. But with losses mounting, it is becoming increasingly difficult, particularly for Ukraine, which has a smaller manpower pool. The Economist estimates that at least 60 to 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died in this war so far. Their estimate of the Russian KIA was 106 to 140,000 in June 2024, and they have suffered thousands more losses due to the intensification of its offensive in several sectors. For the visually documented equipment losses suffered by both parties as of November 27th, we rely on the data brought to you by the Oryx blog. Russia has lost at least 3,588 tanks, 8,357 vehicles, 293 command posts and communication stations, 1,403 artillery systems and vehicles, 444 multiple rocket launchers, 132 aircraft, and 147 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 980 tanks, 3,330 vehicles, 25 command posts and communication stations, 685 artillery systems and vehicles, 80 multiple rocket launchers, 101 aircraft, and 50 helicopters. Further updates on the war in Ukraine are on the way. If you don't want to miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member-exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.